Welcome to Patrox Radio, where my goal is to create a space for thought-provoking discussions and meaningful conversations that inspires positive change and action. From personal growth and wellness to social justice and activism, and especially to environmental sustainability and conservation, I cover it all. I hope you enjoy your time listening in, so let's get on with this week's episode. Hello everyone and welcome back. It is me, of course, Patrox, and I really hope you guys enjoyed this new intro I'm trying to use. I know it could use a little work, I know it could always be better, but for now, I think that this is better than every cold opening I've been trying to do. So I hope it works for you guys. If you have listened to part 1 of this, you'll know that today I wanted to cover a lot of Chevron's scandals and just things that the public ought to know more about, but that the common people don't really know too much about. Let's start with something simple, something that actually happened this year. But to do that, let's give a little prior context. Do you remember at the start of the Biden presidency, the growing oil prices we all experienced? You know, the problem he had inherited. How about the failed OPEC deal that forced him to release oil from the Federal Stock Reserve? Ultimately a good move, as it brought prices down without fucking the average citizen over for once. Initially, he sold just 50 million barrels in November of 2021, but the Russian invasion of the Ukraine was the incentive to sell another 30 million barrels in March 2022 to avoid the gas prices being affected from the war. At the same time, Biden would announce a plan to sell 180 million more barrels over the course of 180 days, so 1 million barrels a day. I'd say it was a really smart move that helps out so many, as being somebody who is severely affected by gas prices by the vehicle he drives. It helped out a lot, let me tell you. On March 8, Biden said this during his talk addressing Republican comments that his decisions and policies have been problematic for the country. Quote, "In the United States, 90% of onshore oil production takes place on land that isn't owned by the federal government. And of the remaining 10% that occurs on federal land, the oil and gas industry has millions of acres leased." He later on went to say, quote, "They have 9,000 permits to drill now. They could be drilling right now, yesterday, last week, last year. They have 9,000 to drill onshore that are already approved," unquote. Which is true. So let's use this context, and I bring this up to add some context to the $75 billion stock buyback program hosted by Chevron that started earlier this month. For some context, to make sure that we know how stock buybacks work, the easy part to understand is that it's literally a company paying those who own their stock for it back. Sourced from Forbes, Forbes.com says this, quote, "The main reason companies buy back their own stock is to create value for their shareholders. In this case, value means a rising share price. Here's how it works. Whenever there's a demand for a company's shares, the price of the stock rises. When a company buys its own shares, it's helping to increase the price for its stock by boosting demand, thereby creating value for all its shareholders. One of corporate America's highest goals is to maximize shareholder values. According to this principle, a company should always aim to generate the highest possible returns for its investors. Increasing the value of its stock and returning cash to holders in the form of dividends and share buybacks is how companies maximize value for shareholders. While dividend payments are perhaps the most common way to return cash to shareholders, there are advantages to stock buybacks." And then Forbes goes on to list direct boost price shares. "The main goal of any share repurchase program is to deliver a higher share price. The board may feel that the company's shares are undervalued, making it a good time to buy them. Meanwhile, investors may perceive a buyback as an expression of confidence by the management. After all, why would a company want to buy back its stock in anticipated to decline in value? There's also tax efficiency. Dividend payments are taxed as income, whereas rising share values aren't taxed at all. Keep that in mind. Any holders who sell their shares back to the company may recognize capital gains taxes, naturally, but shareholders who do not sell reap the reward of a higher share value and no additional taxes. There's also more flexibility than dividends. Any company that initiates a new dividend or increases an existing dividend will need to continue making payments over the long term. That's because they risk lower share values and unhappy investors if they reduce or eliminate the dividends going forward. Meanwhile, since share buybacks are one-offs, they are much more flexible tools for management. Offset dilution. This is the last one. Growing companies may find themselves in a race to attract talent. If they issue stock options to retain employees, the options that are exercised over time increase the company's total number of shares outstanding and dilute existing shareholders. Buybacks are one way to offset this effect. So that's all from Forbes. Basically, in detail explaining that it is more tax efficient to do it this way, as it's less taxes that the shareholder has to deal with overall. It is an easier way to give cash back while also inflating the money they're already gambling in their current stock, whatever isn't bought back from any shareholder. So they're increasing value two ways. By paying you back what you initially put in, plus whatever premium they put on top of that, which we'll get into, and they are raising the value of your initial stake that you already have. So does that make sense? I really hope so, because this is why stock buybacks are so bad. Because when you use this money, and I'll go into this again later, but when you use this money to just pay back your shareholders, you had the potential to use this money to reinvest into the employees who actually realize that value. They are the reason that value actually exists, because it is the workers that legitimize that the product, the service, and the company's viability in the market. So when they take this money and just give it back to the shareholders, they're saying fuck you to the people who actually created the value. Just keep that in mind. So moving on, unlike their last buyback program that ended a few days prior to April 1st, this program that Chevron has announced has no set expiration date. During the Russian-Ukrainian war, Chevron saw over 40% in value, meaning a whole lot of profit, while the economy as a whole was going negative. When they made the initial announcement on January 25th of this year, 2023, the oil giant simultaneously announced it would raise its dividends by 6%, from $1.42 a share to $1.51 a share. They are trying to buy approximately 1/5 of their stock to inflate the value of their stock to keep their profits going. Meanwhile, they are limiting domestic production to increase gas prices to increase profits. These announcements earned Chevron intense criticism from the Biden administration. I would hesitate to say intense, but it did earn some big criticism from the Biden administration, with the White House spokesperson Abdullah Hassan stating, quote, "For a company that claimed to not long ago that it was working hard to increase oil production, handing out $75 billion to executives and wealthy shareholders is a sure odd way to show it," unquote. And yeah, very fucking true. So, let me put it this way. You're Chevron, and you have $75 billion, and you have a choice with the $75 billion. We could make the material lives of our employees better. We can make the working conditions safer. We could ease some redundancies and inefficiencies in the company just to make everything flow better and we waste less money. Or we could take this money and pay back the people, the shareholders, that have funded billions of dollars in here and hasn't worked a day into these oil fields or any of the accounting firms or any of the distribution that takes place with this. We can pay those guys instead. And I did the math. From what they initially put in, the value assumed before the premium hike, to paying them back with the 6% premium, what you're doing is saying, instead of giving $75 billion to the employees to help them out, I'm just going to pay back what I owe them with the stock and throw in an extra $4.5 billion, because that's what it amounts to get back up to that $75 billion mark. That's what that 6% share mean, or 6% premium means. $4.5 billion. That's what that means, just to contextualize it. You know, there's so much to cover, and I'm sure I'm going to want to cover business strategies like this for how businesses keep their money out of the hands of people who need it. I'm probably going to want to cover this more, but I wanted to nail this one now because it is important and it is relevant, but it doesn't come up very frequently in a lot of the research I do. But I'm going to go ahead and move on. So I also found out that there was a company called Cobasys LLC. Used to be. It was a joint venture between Chevron and Energy Conversion Devices, or ECD Ovonics. They supplied nickel metal hydride batteries for automotive industries and other appliances. In 2009, the company was sold to SB Limotive due to a disagreement between the two companies' owners over future funding. As I understand, Chevron put pretty much the majority of the investment into the company's existence. I'm so sorry, but I can't pronounce her last name. But Sherry Boschert, something like that. Boschert. I'm gonna go with Boschert. That sounds good. Sherry, the author who wrote the book Plug-in Hybrids: The Cars That Will Recharge America, accused Chevron of limiting access to large nickel metal hydride batteries to remove a competitor to gasoline, but the founder of ECD Ovonics denied this claim. I couldn't verify without buying a physical copy of the book because I'm broke, but Wikipedia says this. Boschert argued that large format nickel metal hydride batteries are commercially viable, but that Cobasys refused to sell the batteries or license the technology to small companies or individuals. Boschert argues that Cobasys accepts only very large orders for the batteries. Major automakers showed little interest in placing large orders for large form nickel metal hydride batteries. However, Toyota complained about the difficulty in getting smaller orders of large format nickel metal hydride batteries to service their existing 825 RAV4 EVs. Because no other companies were willing to place large orders, Cobasys was not manufacturing or licensing large format nickel metal hydride battery technology for automobiles. Boschert concludes that, quote, it's impossible that Cobasys is squelching all access to large nickel metal hydride batteries through its control of patent licenses in order to remove a competitor to gasoline. Or it's possible that Cobasys simply wants to market for itself and is waiting for a major automaker to start producing plug-in hybrids or electric vehicles, unquote. She pointed to the fact that Cobasys filed a patent infringement lawsuit against Panasonic and Toyota, which was settled with each company granting the other a license to its patents. Boschert argued that Cobasys refused to sell or license the technology to small companies or individuals and accepted only very large orders for the batteries. In 2007 and 2008, Cobasys was sued by International Acquisition Services and Innovative Transportation Systems and Mercedes-Benz for failing to fill orders of large format nickel metal hydride batteries. I'll leave it here, as I'm likely to come back to this specific discussion in the future when I want to cover like the strategies that corporations use to either stifle growth, to hoard cash, or just limit access, or to nickel and dime access if you want for services. Uh, Moving on to a very, very important thing that cannot be ignored is the human rights violations that this company has been behind. I got a little lucky in finding a new tool that's actually related to the violation tracker that I normally use, which we'll use in the next episode. This one, I found the Corporate Research Project. Uh, Going here, I just typed in Chevron just to see what it would give me, and it gave me a whole litany of information just broken down and easy to read. Highly encourage you to do it yourself and just read, because I only pulled out little bits of information from this page. But I did pull the human rights section, and then we're going to read the entire human rights section from the Corporate Research Project for Chevron. So let's go over to Ecuador first. When Chevron took over Texaco, it also acquired a long-standing controversy over their company's operations in Ecuador. For nearly a decade, Texaco had been fighting a lawsuit charging that it had engaged in a massive amount of toxic dumping over the course of 2 decades. After their case was blocked in U.S. federal court, the plaintiff in 2003 filed a $1 billion action against Chevron, Texaco, and Ecuador. Critics confronted the company over the issue at events such as its annual meeting. At the 2005 meeting, then CEO David O'Reilly shut down the floor microphone before a prominent Ecuadorian rainforest leader had a chance to speak about the environmental impact of the company's operations. Chevron lobbied the Bush administration to use trade sanctions to get Ecuador to drop the case, but the suit continued. In 2009, there were reports that the company could face damages as high as $27 billion, making it the world's largest environmental lawsuit. The Amazon Defense Coalition criticized the company for not disclosing the full extent of the potential liability to its shareholders, and in August 2009, the case took an unexpected turn when Chevron claimed it had video evidence that the judge in the case was being bribed by Ecuadorian government officials. The judge withdrew from the case, but Chevron kept up the pressure and filed an arbitration action through a United Nations Trade Commission and demanded that the government pay the company's legal fees and, quote, moral damages, unquote, because of its alleged interference in the lawsuit. How fucking petty. It goes on to say that later, questions were raised about the integrity of the evidence and of the 2 businessmen who had secretly taped the judge. In March 2010, a U.S. federal judge ruled against an effort by the government of Ecuador to bar Chevron from proceeding with the UN arbitration action. In February of 2011, the new judge in the Ecuador case ordered Chevron to pay more than $9 billion in damages. Just for some context, it was later increased to $18 billion and then later lowered to $9.5 billion. But the company appealed the ruling both in Ecuador and the United States. Surprise, surprise. In October 2012, however, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Chevron's appeal without comment. Chevron then brought a racketeering lawsuit against the plaintiff's U.S. lawyer, that's Steven Donziger, by the way, and in March 2014, a federal judge ruled that the judgment should not be enforced. Chevron then went after the plaintiff's law firm, Patton Boggs, which gave in to the pressure and agreed to pay $15 million to Chevron. The whole Ecuadorian case is very big, very well known, and whenever I get my own YouTube channel going, I might cover it more because it's an active case actually still going. If you research anything about Steven Donziger, you'll know it's still going on today between Chevron and him. But we're not talking about Donziger right now. Let's move on to the next place, Nigeria. So, like Royal Dutch Shell, Chevron was a target of criticism during the 1990s for its ties to the repressive government in Nigeria. In 1998, journalist Amy Goodman reported that Chevron officials helped facilitate an assault by Nigerian troops on protesters who were occupying an offshore oil platform in the Niger Delta. 2 protesters were killed, and others were taken into custody and allegedly tortured by Nigerian authorities. It later came out that the Nigerian soldiers had billed Chevron for their services. In 1999, a group of Nigerian citizens filed a lawsuit against Chevron in U.S. federal court under the Alien Tort Claims Act. This case finally came to trial in 2008. After weeks of testimony, a jury found that Chevron was not legally responsible for what happened to the protesters. The plaintiffs appealed, but were turned down by the U.S. Supreme Court. That's fucking bullshit, in my opinion. I'm just saying, it's bullshit. Chevron was also one of the biggest petroleum companies sued in 2005 for gas flaring, but that's an environmentally hazardous and illegal practice that continues to this day. There's 3 more small sections real quick. Chad and Cameroon. In 2005, Amnesty International published a report warning that an oil pipeline project in Chad and Cameroon, led by ExxonMobil and Chevron, threatened human rights in the 2 African countries because the agreement signed by the companies and the 2 governments, which have a poor track record in respecting rights, put such a high premium on maintaining the financial stability of the project. Burma. In 2008, Earth Rights International accused Chevron of complicity in human rights abuses in the areas around the natural gas pipeline it co-owns with Burma. Unocal, which was acquired by Chevron in 2005, had previously been sued by Earth Rights International for its abuses in Burma, and it settled the case out of court. And the last one, Kazakhstan. Very small. Chevron is one of the companies being targeted by groups such as Crude Accountability for Human Rights, environmental and labor abuses in connection with the Karachaganak oil and gas field in Kazakhstan. I really hope I pronounced that correctly. But it sounds like that's an ongoing thing, which I might try to look into in the future. But with all that being said, we cannot ignore the biggest, fattest fucking elephant in the room. According to Climate Accountability Institute, Chevron has been the worst American polluter. It topped their charts with a cumulative 48 billion tons of CO2 emissions between 1995 and 2018. If we were to go back to the corporate research project, we can pull a few specific cases that aren't just normal production. According to the site, in 1993, Chevron paid $500,000 in fines after pleading no contest in charges of misdemeanor criminal violations of California law in connection with a 1991 oil spill off of El Segundo. In 1996, Chevron agreed to pay $700,000 to settle charges at its refinery in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, after it violated the Clean Air Act through sulfur dioxide emissions. In 1998, Chevron agreed to pay $540,000 to settle charges brought by EPA that the company bypassed a wastewater treatment system at its Richmond refinery, resulting in toxic releases into the San Pablo Bay over a period of 5 years. In 2001, a group of companies, including Chevron, settled a lawsuit that had been brought by communities for a better environment over the contamination of groundwater in California by the carcinogenic gasoline additive MTBE. In the wake of that agreement, Chevron faced a series of other MTBE cases in California and other states. In 2008, Chevron and several other oil companies agreed to pay $422 million to settle suits that had been brought by the public water systems in 20 states and consolidated in federal court. In 2004, Chevron Phillips Chevron Phillips Chemical agreed to pay a $1.8 million civil penalty for Clean Air Act violations that led to 2 explosions and released toxic chemicals at a manufacturing facility in Pasadena, Texas in 1999 and 2000. Fun fact, that's 20 minutes away from me. That's like literally just down the road from me. I could keep going, but I believe I have discussed this enough. There is, of course, one more episode of Chevron that I want to make covering their most serious settlements and fines for their violations. But in the end, I hope I have shed some light to the kinds of behemoths that we're dealing with combating against climate change. We have to know the history and damages left by these corporations to establish future solutions away from profit-focused industry leaders. This episode doesn't cover everything, but that's for you to discover when you grow passionate enough to be motivated forwards. That's why I'm doing this. But doing this has made me tired, and I think that this is a good place to stop. Now, when I was doing the preliminary research for this, there was so much I just wanted to throw in on this episode. There was so much I wanted to fill that this would have been like a 2-3 hour episode. Like, I had 12-13 pages of information and notes that I was just tallying all together, and a normal episode is anywhere from 3 to 5 pages long. But I couldn't do it. I had to simplify it because this is one of those behemoth companies that have been around forever, like we discussed in the first episode. They were there at the precipice of the oil boom in America for the most part. These were guys that ensured the oil industry's whole direction from its conception. We cannot fight this easily, but it pays to know. It pays to understand. And so I hope I have helped you guys understand more here, especially with the stock buybacks, because I know that's something a lot of people just kind of know, but they don't understand very well. They don't understand why it's bad. They don't understand the mechanical process as to why it's making them more money, so they don't even know how to argue against such a action, even though they know that it leads to the people who need the money not getting money. But I digress. I could keep going on, and I'm going to save that energy for the next episode, which I hope we can see somebody new today. I have a potential new co-host that I cannot wait to introduce you guys to, and if we are lucky and everything works out, you'll get to meet him in the next episode. But with that being said, we're going to leave it here. I hope you guys have learned something wonderful. I hope you guys have had a more critical perspective on not just the oil companies, but Chevron specifically today. And I hope that you all know that I love you and Mama Terra loves you. Have a great day, guys.
Tongue-tied in the rain, soaked to my toes, got the chills to the bone. Cold stare through the haze, shrill in my voice and my lungs swell with pain. Call me out by my name, speak to me soft, help me gather my thoughts. Drown it out, plug the drain. Turn the record over, it can't be over. Ah, 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 ah. Write me when you get there, to that better place where you can think straight. Send me love if you can. Manifest the best of your wildest fantasies. I hope you find what you need. Over the hills sunsets in the trees, soak in the glorious rays. The sun will be out, beating down on your shoulders. Tie a rope round my waist as I venture into the dark. I'll be back by the time you finally know where you are. Tear my ego apart. We are all we are, and we are all but one. Send me up to the stars. The distance between means nothing to me. Or bury me in the sand after I've done for you all that I can. I'll tell you what I knew, but I've got no concept of what I'll know.